So welcome again, everyone, to the Whitmire IP Group Tech Entrepreneur Meetup. This is our monthly meetup where we bring in speakers from various technological fields to learn something new about technology in various industries. We're always, really thrilled to have outside speakers that can really speak to what's happening in industry on the ground. And tonight is no exception. We're very thankful to have Michael Miron talk to us today. And the key question that Michael is going to be speaking about is, and it was in our description, how do you market something over the internet that is secret for much of its life? And Michael works for and with a company called Ideation. And Ideation is seeking to solve this issue by providing a comprehensive ERP for managing intellectual property that manages or that allows for marketing of intellectual property without compromising its security. And the Whitmire IP Group is an intellectual property law firm dealing with patents and trademarks. So we don't currently work with Ideation, but we're very excited to see what the technology is and what the platform can provide. Among the many unique features of the platform is the incorporation of Fully Homomorphic Encryption, which enables search and analytics to be performed on encrypted data. And a little bit more background about our speaker. Michael has extensive experience in creating, building, and transforming businesses, particularly those enabled or leveraged by information technologies. Prior to joining Ideation, and for which he is the CEO, Michael was managing director of M2 Advisors, an independent management and investment advisory service to information intensive and technology enabled companies. And he has a long and successful history prior to that as well, which you probably saw in our description. So again, we're very excited to have Michael tonight. And he would like, if you have questions during the presentation, to go ahead and to shout them out. If you don't want to unmute yourself, you can also write it in a message, and I can interrupt Michael for us and ask your question. So without further ado, Michael, please take it away.
Thanks, Ben, and welcome everybody. Also want to introduce Douglas Graham, who was the founder of Ideation, who is listening in and may, on occasion, if called for, be part of the discussion. But so Douglas is with us, and I will actually talk a little bit about the founding of it, which is really his idea, and he's been working with this for some time now. So Ideation, we're talking about transforming the global market for intellectual property. Ideation itself has this secure platform in the cloud for managing intellectual assets through the entire business system, all the way from idea conception through monetization. We'll spend a bit of time discussing the IP industry itself. It does lag substantially on the use of digital network technologies, and therefore has not received the benefit of those transformations like so many other industries have, such as retailing and media and publishing, but IP has not. It's still largely manual, and we'll go through all that. And we also have exclusive access to a breakthrough security technology which allows us to market intellectual property securely in the cloud without unnecessarily or prematurely disclosing it, but still going to market with it, which one normally thinks of as a contradiction in terms, but we do have an answer to that. So we'll cover those items, and as Ben mentioned at the outset, please, let's make this interactive. If you have a question, either say something or give it to Ben through the chat, because if there's a topic you want to discuss, let's just do it while the topic's live rather than wait till the end, okay? All right, this is probably redundant for a lot of you, but we're talking about the value chain all the way from the sources of IP, whether they be private or public, all the way through the various management components, who take that IP and then take it to market in various market makers, and ultimately it's used somewhere. Most IP today goes to market in support of products, but there are defensive and offensive uses for them as part of legal activity, as well as there is some, but not a lot, of trading of IP. If you look at Europe and the United States, they would tell you the IP-intensive industries are really, really important. They're something like 40% of GDP. They employ tens of millions of people. They're big chunks of it. They grow faster than the other parts of the economy, and they have typically substantial wage premiums over non-IP intensive industries. And they're accounting for an increasing amount of exports in both merchandises and services, and there is some licensing revenue, but you see those numbers are relatively small compared to the size of the global economy, and there are reasons for that. So despite their importance, as I mentioned at the outset, the IP industry does lag on digital transformation. Despite the fact that it's the business of innovation, it really still manages via manual, expensive, insecure techniques. And so in general, it's undermanaged. Douglas saw this in serving many of his clients when he was a managing director at KPMG. And these are just some of the issues that he saw repeatedly. And I think he would tell you that many of the problems he saw in his clients at their root were often traced back to they didn't know what intellectual property they have. As a consequence, they don't know where it is, and so it's often stolen or misappropriated. There aren't very many best practices applied, and in some cases, people don't even know what those are. It's also difficult to go to market with this stuff because you tend to want to keep it secret. That tends to preclude much sharing, except with very high overhead, high touch manual connections. As a consequence, it's very labor intensive. And while there are some tools, they tend to be specific to certain parts of the value chain, but we don't have complete automation. I should mention that I was once a Xerox officer, and I was one of 4 officers who sat on the committee that looked after our 50,000 patents about what to do with them. And I can tell you, we operated with very minimal information. And the staffs would prepare stuff, but we were flying, I would say, 80% blind. And Xerox, of course, is known for having lots of innovations, only a fraction of which, of course, it capitalized on. Licensing is costly and time-consuming. It's hard to find people, and it tends to be face-to-face because we don't have the benefit of the network to connect far-reaching potential collaborators. We'll go through an example about how we solve that. And funding early innovation, if you're not captive in a large enterprise, is not the easiest thing to do. You can do it, but it's painful. There are other issues as well, but these are typical. If you look at some numbers, this is some years ago, but it's indicative of what we see today as well. Intangibles are something approaching 90% of global balance sheets, but they are less than 1% of global trade. Most IP goes to market in support of a product or service that underpins the company offering it. The assets themselves are traded. Oh, sure, if you're IBM, you can do it. But if you're an innovator, a professor somewhere, an emerging market, a small company, you typically don't get at this. And I've talked to a lot of them, and many of them understand that they have IP to do things with. But because it's expensive and time consuming and they're working flat out, they tend to put it aside and come back to it later. And that means it's typically undermanaged. So this depicts the current state of affairs. Only 1% of it's licensed. Less than 6% is reported in financials, even though you're supposed to value it and include it on your balance sheets. $1 trillion plus in the US alone is stolen annually. That may be low, given that a lot of theft is simply not known. There's also a lot of reinvention of what exists because people are unaware of what innovations might be licensable to build upon. And then the vast majority is probably just not known. And so that is the state of affairs that is still largely true today. And that's something Douglas saw, what, some 20 years ago, Douglas? And that yielded a book that he wrote about the subject, identifying all the problems and suggesting solutions. And so he observed developments in the industry, and notwithstanding the approach to have IP asset management systems or some tech transfer systems aimed at universities, he didn't see anybody really going after this problem. So about 4 or 5 years ago, he decided to build it himself. And then I ran into Douglas about a year ago, and because of my background is all about IP and disruptive technologies and transformation and software as a service, I decided to join the effort and take his vision and what he's done to date and take this to market. Douglas, I miss anything on the background?
No, I think that was pretty comprehensive.
Okay. So that yielded a platform that has 28 modules. and it covers the entire value chain, all the way from innovation to monetization. And I'm not going to go through them here. If you're interested, there's a lot of documentation on the site. And I should mention, we're about to relaunch this thing with some enhanced capability in a few weeks. And so if you come back to us probably towards the end of the month, you'll see some new capabilities. But the idea is to have an on-demand access to a comprehensive system securely in the cloud to manage your IP and remove all the speed bumps we can find to make the management of intellectual property as easy as some of the other on-demand business systems that exist in other industries. So with that as kind of an introduction, let's just go through some of the highlights. So registering IP, know what you have. A lot of people have eLab notebooks. All too many people still use Excel spreadsheets for this. I hate to admit, when I was at Xerox, now this was in the late 90s, we were using the spreadsheets as late as the 90s. So users capture ideas as they think of them, and you could just copy and paste from what you have today into the system in the cloud and register it. And so when you register it, you'll create both a marketing abstract, which is generally widely available, as well as proprietary information. So the marketing tends to be, here's what we've done, and the proprietary tends to be, here's how we did it. And you have very precise control over what kind of access you want, as well as, do you want to put this information in the clear? Do you want to encrypt it with something called Fully Homomorphic Encryption, which I'll come back to later, or just a digest? And then decide what kind of access you want to grant, both on the marketing as well as the proprietary. Then we sorry, was there a question? All right, so when we run through a cryptographic hash on all the content, it's time stamped and then added to a blockchain. So everything we do on the platform is done on a blockchain, so you have an absolute irrefutable attestation trail of who invented what, who commented when, who saw what when. And so the normal disputes you might see in a large enterprise or between collaborators, because everything is recorded on a blockchain, we've addressed that problem. And in my own experience, and Douglas can share some as well, if you're in a large company and you want to encourage collaboration, sometimes credit for whose idea it was ends up in dispute. Well, not here, because we have the blockchain recording every interaction, including suggestions and evaluations and collaborations and merging of IP and all that kind of stuff. And so every access to this is logged, and the whole thing's on a blockchain. Okay, so that's one problem. Next thing is how you protect this. And so I mentioned we have both marketing abstract as well as proprietary content, and you have very fine-grained control over what kind of access you want to provide. So on the left, say the marketing access tends to be wider. Do you want to make it for anybody in the public, just a community, clustered community, just within your organization, and of course all the way down into an individual? And even within that, if you've selected a particular domain, you can then override that and have specific includes and excludes to give you very precise control over who sees the marketing abstract. Similarly, on the proprietary content, you can do the same thing. And this leaves aside the question about whether you want to encrypt it or not. So now let's come to this question of how do you market something that's secret for most of its life? And even if it's patented, if it's not in a big country, like maybe an emerging market, that's not really much protection. So this stuff tends to stay secret. So we have figured out a way using fully homomorphic encryption to separate discovery from disclosure. Let me spend a minute on FHE. So I'm going to, and general encryption. If you think about public key encryption today, the theory behind it, by having long keys of 2048 or 4096 or potentially bigger, is that the brute force computing to break the encryption was simply impractical. It takes you way too long. And so you typically go on to the next thing and skip it. However, with the advent of quantum computing, that's no longer the case. And so these things can be hacked, and it's rumor has it that the Chinese have hacked most public keys, which accounts for a lot of the leakage that we see. But even if it's not hacked, if you load something up into the cloud and it's encrypted, and now I want to do something with it, I want to search it, I want to edit it, I want to perform mathematical operations on it, I have to decrypt it, and now I have an open channel, and that channel is now a weak point that can potentially be accessed, and therefore the IP stolen. For many years, the holy grail of encryption was something called homomorphic encryption, the theory of which is, can I operate on an encrypted file without decrypting it? And fully homomorphic encryption allows you to perform any number of actions on an encrypted file without the need to decrypt it. Now, for many years, the problem with it is that it's slow and the files get very big. And as a consequence, if you have something less than sub-second response time, it's really not practical for everyday business transactions. Indeed, IBM has been a big proponent of this, but in some of their early demos, they would serve refreshments because the thing was computing in the background and they didn't really want people to see that it just took too much time. Well, we have exclusive access to a new algorithm that operates in real time in a browser. And so all of a sudden, you now have fully homomorphic encryption available to everyday business transactions. So let me take you through a transaction. So one person submits an invention. This is the inventor. We then encrypt it with FHE, and it sits up on the cloud at Ideation encrypted. Now, we don't know what's in it because we don't have a key to decrypt it. We have an operating key so that we can search an encrypted file with an encrypted term, but we ourselves as the host, by design, do not need to know what your proprietary information is. And in a world of concerns about what's in the cloud and is your cloud service provider using your information for advantage, by design, the way FHE works and our business model is we don't need that, nor do we want it. So then he registers that on the blockchain. And what we now have is another client is going to search for microbial detection because he's interested in finding whether there's an innovation. So he puts that search term up on the cloud. We encrypt the keyword and then search the encrypted file with the encrypted keyword. If we get a hit, we communicate back to the searcher that there is something on Ideation. You got a hit. The inventor has chosen to remain anonymous, and we don't know what it is. So we invite you, if you're interested in learning more, to send a secure message to the inventor. And then if the inventor wants to grant you access based upon your expressed interest in who you are, we have a 2-click NDA that you could send back, and we can also execute a license on the platform also with a handful of clicks. So the theory is we can now connect people from the far reaches of the earth who are interested in secure technologies, including things like trade secrets and other things that may not be patented, without prematurely disclosing it and securely in the cloud. Okay, so that's how FHE works. Okay, and then any transaction is recorded on the blockchain. And so as a consequence, we have an absolute attestation trail and a track record of every interaction with this while keeping it secure unless and until the inventor decides to share it with someone of interest. Okay, so that's how FHE works in our context, and that exists on Ideation. All right, now because of that, we can also now add a gateway to this. So we don't have to necessarily be on the platform to find this. So we have gateways to the major search engines. So now we're just subject to SEO. And if you were to enter that term and get a match, you would get a hit back on the search return and then be invited to come to the platform and create a free account and send a secure message to the inventor. So as a result, we don't have to necessarily build a lot of liquidity on the platform to allow someone to go to market with intellectual property. Okay. Now what I want to do next is actually show you a 3-minute video that's a demo to try to just give you a flavor of what goes on the platform rather than log in and spend the time doing that. Before I do that, let me just pause for a second and ask whether anybody has any questions about what I've covered so far.
Michael, I have a question. I think you've answered it, but so you in no way vet the information that comes in, and so So what about like employees uploading, their employer's trade secrets or anything like that? Is there any way to control the information that's uploaded, or once you would receive a notice, is there a way to purge it from the system or anything like that?
Yeah, if you're an enterprise, there is an administrative module, and someone would establish the rights and permissions of whatever users get authorized. And because everything they do is recorded on the blockchain, the training would emphasize that whatever you do here is going to get recorded, and you don't have the ability to erase your tracks. So there isn't a delete function on what you've done. So the whole idea is that absolute audit trail together with administrative control should get at that need and will be configured according to the enterprise's requirements.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Any other questions before I jump into the demo? Okay, so what I'm going to do is, this is roughly 3 minutes. I'm going to stop it in a few places, so the elapsed time will be maybe 4 or 5 minutes, just to give you some highlights of this. So this is a little video with some highlights. Okay, so you can easily register innovations. And so on this screen, we have marketing information in the upper left, proprietary information on the lower left, and then access levels, and then supporting documentation. And like I said, you can copy and paste into this, which is what we're going to do. So here we have marketing information, proprietary information, and then you can go over and add an image to support, which would show up in the search results. You can decide on what kind of access level you'd like for the marketing information. You can then upload supporting documentations, calculate and store hashes, and then have the option to encrypt it with FHE, and then all that supporting documentation would appear there. And similarly, you can apply access levels for who gets the proprietary information and the FHE. And so this is an innovation page and is pretty easy to register. Now, if someone wants to go search, this is how you would search for innovations. So in this case, we're going to search a search term. So this is phytohormone. And let me just back up here for a second and tell you that this transaction is actually, there was a guy in, Tennessee, who developed technology to allow plants to absorb water 25% more efficiently, which is a pretty good thing to do in agriculture. And he thought it would be cool if someone had a similar technology to allow them to absorb nutrients more efficiently. So he's searching for this term phytohormone to see if there's somebody who's invented this. And it turns out that there's a guy in the Ukraine, a former bioweapon scientist, who has turned this technology towards commercial purposes, which is actually a US State Department program to try to channel these former weapon scientists to commercial ends. But most of them don't get paid very much. If they have a patent, it's the Ukraine, which is worthless. And so we do have some early users in the Ukraine to try to take some of that technology and give them the ability to monetize it in a way they would never be able to do. So in this case, the guy's searching for phytohormone. He does a search, and you see he got two things back, something that was in the clear and an FHE encrypted document with a button to contact the authors. So he's going to send them a secure message and say, I'm interested in this. And he's going to waive his anonymity, because if you remain anonymous, chances are the inventor won't necessarily grant you this. So now we're going to the receiving of the innovator. So he's getting this I'm interested message, and he is going to reply with an instantly created NDA. And so he would attach the NDA together with the message. And here it's a pretty standard NDA. You put in your jurisdiction, and then there's a drop down on the invention that it's supposed to cover, and then you would digitally sign and attach it, and this of course is recorded on the blockchain, and send that off. On the receiving end, the guy gets the NDA, reviews it, executes it, sends it back, and all of this is recorded on the blockchain. So the theory here is that all of these things can take weeks often. We're trying to reduce this to a few minutes or maybe some days. And you can also execute a license, right? And which we'll get into in a second. So this is a confirming message that I've signed the NDA, and now I'm looking forward to receiving your documentation on the invention. So this is the licensing module. So the same idea is to have all these building blocks readily available in the cloud so you can create a license without necessarily having to go through the long, elongated many months licensing activity that we typically see and that I've actually just been through on behalf of Ideation. So what we're trying to do is give anybody the ability to manage innovations pretty straightforwardly in the cloud, including anything, not just patents, but trade secrets, manuscripts, anything that you wish to potentially share or manage, and find possibly a counterparty without prematurely disclosing it, and then have a record of everything you do. So you can find counterparties anywhere, thereby taking the power of digital network technologies, which is part of the transformation exercise, and then shorten whatever agreement process that typically goes with these things from months to hours or days if people want to do it, because all the building blocks will be there. And so that is Ideation. Any questions about the demo or the platform?
This is Chris. I have a question.
Sure.
Do they have to search on your platform? I thought I saw a slide previously that said like they could also just search on
the gateway. Yes, we have the gateway. So the idea is to not necessarily require someone to join the platform. Obviously, our hope is that if they discover it in the gateway in a search, they'll want to join the platform because it's free for individuals. So it's a freemium model.
So someone just say like searching on Google for the example you just had, that would come up in the Google Ideation website would come up in the Google search, and then that would.
Right, and then you click on it and you'd be taken to our platform, and we would ask you to take a free account, register as a free account, and send a message that says, I'm interested.
Interesting, okay.
Okay,
thank you.
So this gets to another part to this. If you look around, you'll see intangible asset management systems, you'll see tech transfer systems, you'll see some trading systems. They all tend to be very expensive, you know, hundreds or thousands of dollars per seat. We're taking a page out of the transformational businesses, which says the basic ERP capability is free, because we want to encourage people to put IP up in the cloud and just start using the asset management side of this. And so we don't charge individuals for that. So you can take a basic subscription and do that. Now, if you want to actually do something, find a counterparty or execute a transaction, then we'd ask you to become a pro user, but it's still not very expensive. And then, of course, the enterprise user, these tends to be negotiated. But the whole idea is to make the price of the service a non-obstacle, that you can almost do this on impulse if you just want to respond to something and get a basic free account. Because we expect that there'll be a whole bunch of services that people will pay for if they take them. So for example, if you take a license on the platform, our commission is 7.5%, reflecting the efficiencies of the cloud. Now, typically, if you hire a patent agent, that number is 25 or 30%. And so what we expect is that this will be appealing to entrepreneurs and individuals, and we're going to go to the VCs for their portfolio companies who have IP but don't manage it yet. So here, it's not expensive, it's automated, you don't need a lot of time, and you can start managing without a big hurdle to get in or a high cost to maintain. That's the theory behind this. And then if you see at the bottom there, we have a whole series of things that we expect to offer on this, and not just from us, from third parties who want to do things on here. And so we see this as a platform that can be used comprehensively or certain aspects to it. Let me give you one example. Because of what we're doing, even at our early stage, we do get in touch with some rather interesting innovators. So one of them, I mean, apart from the FHE technology, which we have not only the rights to use our own platform, but the exclusive worldwide rights to sub-license it to anybody who's interested in this new FHE. And so we're going to put that up as a portfolio and invite people to go take a look, and if they want to license it. But we also have another company, which we've reached agreement, who has roughly 300 patents and applications from 14 disclosures in the world of high temperature superconductors. Now, if you know anything about superconductors, near absolute zero, they would take on zero resistance. And so you get massive power implications, huge throughput, tremendous bandwidth expansion, but absolute zero is impractical. So again, the whole idea is if somebody could figure out how to get superconductor properties at something higher temperature, it would have commercial application. So these guys have developed things that would allow you to get into kind of freezer range. So now all of a sudden things like mobile base stations and server farms and data centers, potentially for no power increase, could get massive expansions of power. Now they're an IP licensing company, and as we got into this with them, they really didn't know everything they had, and they sort of knew, but they really didn't. So we're going to put their portfolio up on here and give people the ability to see it. We're going to try to license it, but they're going to be able to do so as well and refer people to it. Because what they have today is they have a narrow slice of it up on their website. Most of their patents and applications are not visible. If somebody wants to take an IP license to that patent portfolio, they're going to want to see the whole thing and know what they get, because they're not going to want to have to come back and find out later that I didn't get a piece of it. But that's not the easiest thing to represent. But on Ideation, we're going to be able to do that. So that is essentially how we're going to offer this thing, which in itself is somewhat disruptive, because no one has really given people access to this kind of power with an entry price of free. But if you look at all the other transformational businesses, many of them do this because of all the reasons we know, and this is a variant on the same idea. Okay, now just a little bit about what we're going to market. There are really two value propositions one thinks about. One is to individual customers. It's a comprehensive management tool, so just use its asset management capabilities, and if you're an individual, you can do this for free. And then, of course, if you're a market participant, there are all the monetization, search, collaborations, joint venturing, spin-outs, licensing, financing, and everything else you might do, which, as the platform grows, will have its own liquidity, but because of the gateway, we don't have to wait. And so as we go to market, we're really aiming at underserved markets of today. We're not going after the IBMs and the Xeroxes of the world who have big staffs of people and proprietary systems. They can do very well with this, thank you very much, although eventually we expect they will want to play with this as well. But places where there really isn't a solution in place today, so this is smaller companies, venture firms who might want to invest in assets, developing markets, universities in their tech transfer offices, all the array of service firms who might want an easy-to-use, cloud-based system to manage assets. It's not a docketing system. I'm sure you guys at Whitmire have one, but it's something to manage innovations. And so we see a whole big, let's call it long tail away from the large enterprises who have staffs of people who are massively underserved today who could make use of this. And I won't get into it in any kind of depth today, but we're also going to, we have some emerging partnerships with people in other countries to take this platform around the world so that we don't have to build out national affiliates ourselves. So any questions on Ideation? If you want, you can go to ideation.com and see the platform as it is today. The landing page doesn't quite give you the freemium offering yet. That's going to launch in about 2 to 3 weeks. Now, if you're interested in knowing when that is, shoot me an email and we'll let you know.
Michael, does Ideation do assignments as well, or just licenses?
We can assign IP to people and change the owner. Obviously, we're not going to do that to patent offices. You have to do it yourself, but we can change that.
Okay.
There's a whole collaboration module where you combine IP, where you add authors and reviewers, and you can do all that stuff. And some of that's in the administrative module as well. It's less relevant for individuals. It's more relevant for organizations.
And is there any auction feature?
We don't have an auction yet, but that's certainly a possibility. Obviously, this platform can be used in lots and lots and lots of different ways. Mm-hmm. But we're getting started with the ERP capability and the ability to go find people and collaborate with them. But an auction is certainly something we could do. Mm-hmm. Once you get this in place. So the potential I see is rather limitless. If you think about once you get a functioning market, then it becomes an ecosystem. When an ecosystem gets liquidity, then it sort of feeds on itself. And that is what the potential is here. So if you stand back from it, in one measure, we're kind of a SaaS-based, cloud-oriented innovator in the world of intangible asset management and monetization. A step up from that is, if we play our cards right, we're going to end up transforming the industry for intellectual property in much the way other industries have done, and usually somebody acts as a catalyst. So we think we have a pretty good shot at doing that, given what we have and what we see. And ultimately, we think we can create not only our own ecosystem, but a series of related ecosystems, some of which are managed by others, all of which are linked to each other, offering different services, but with the foundation of this logic underpinning each of them. So, we could see white labeling this thing for other domains, but we just want to make sure that the communication, the ability to find somebody and collaborate with them, is as seamless as we could make it. So as we expand it and license the platform for other domains, we're going to want to make sure that there's an interoperability capability that goes with it.
Well, great. I do not have any questions in the messaging. Anyone else want to ask a question? Well, Michael, or?
Well, you can do that, but let me leave you with a parting shot, as it were.
Sure.
And this is kind of an abstraction of my career. I mentioned at the outset, and my bio talks about my whole career has been about the application of digital transformation and disruptive technologies into new industries, This will be my 8th industry, the world of IP. I've done aerospace and defense. I was designed some of the early digital guidance systems for tactical missiles. I was at IBM and joined the day before the launch of the personal computer and saw what that did to the market for computing and was part of that. I've done a lot with the world of consumer and institutional finance, among other things. Did American Express's conversion from paper charge receipts to electronics, including collapsing of the float that they got on the balance sheet to next day settlement. I've been in the world of telecom and wireless. I was at AirTouch Communications, which today is part of the western part of Verizon Wireless, and I did deals around the world to form joint ventures, bid for wireless licenses, and bring to life properties around the world with huge returns, and saw how it just exploded as people took advantage of on-demand personal communications. Information services, publishing, digital rights management, media, and distribution. So I've been involved in all of those industries. Common theme is digital transformation from disruptive technologies. So let me leave you with some personal observation about this subject. First is most of the uses are unforeseen. And so they're not just simply applying disruptive technology to today's business system. That usually is not what happens. And the unforeseen uses come from several aspects of this. One is digital network technologies tend to radically lower the minimum efficient scale to do anything, such that the marginal cost is zero, and therefore you have almost no cost to change. That changes how you go to market. A colleague of mine used to joke, ready, fire, aim. Meaning you can do rapid experimentation, particularly if something's in the cloud, versus the typical development cycle, which is weeks to months. And so as a consequence to that, you just change the entire cycle of this, and you can experiment in ways never done before. Ubiquitous communications links up all devices. And as a result of that, uses that enable collaboration on demand now become every day. Now, when I first came up with this thought, which was 15 years ago, this was not really observed. Today, everybody knows this, right? You pull out your phone and you have instantaneous on-demand communications. And then, of course, the world of rich data and analytics, which may be just as valuable as the business itself. So all of those things enable new uses that hadn't been seen before. That yields new business models. And I like to think that there are really three characteristics that make for a successful business model. If you're missing one of these, the chances are it's not going to work. The first is on demand. Whenever I feel like it, on the fly, without any advanced planning, I can tap the service. If I have to wait or schedule it, most people's days are way too busy for that to happen. And most people will change their behavior as a result of using technology, but not as a condition of doing so. So the thing has to be on demand, seamless. Second, it has to be personalized, otherwise known as market segments of one. Don't force me into some kind of macro standard. I might work for a company, yes, but give me the ability to tune this thing to suit my needs, my time, my access point, you know, et cetera. And the best of these things allow that to happen. And then, of course, community. Don't give me isolation, because much of the value of these services is in connecting with other people around some agenda. The implications for all of this are, as stated here. First, you see long incubation periods where markets operate at essentially tick over with no progress, followed by discontinuous growth. Let me give you an example. Wireless technology was invented by Bell Labs in the 1950s, as was an outgrowth of some of the technology used during the Second World War, that being the wireless cell. The first commercial deployment in the United States, which was second only to Korea, was at the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics, where then Pactel Corporation, which was part of Pacific Telesys Group, put up 2 cell towers and leased handsets for $20 a day and $5 a minute, and the usage exploded. And then, of course, we saw initially the cellular licenses around the world were given out by lottery or beauty contest until people discovered how valuable they were. And then in the late 90s, we started to see spectrum auctions. And I would tell you that in 1998, when I was then head of corporate strategy and development for AirTouch Communications, all the Wall Street models, the best of the analysts said, well, market saturation would happen at maybe 14, 15% of the US population. And they had all these elaborate models about how many hours there were in the day and what the affordability was and how much usage could there really be, and so on and so forth. And of course, they're off by an order of magnitude. Given the Internet of Things, most of us have more than one wireless connection, and penetration is not going to saturate anytime this side of 100% for that reason. There is an initial substitution fear, which tends to freeze incumbents to try to protect their existing business models. That tends to mean that innovators would be outsiders. It's rare to see an innovator do it to himself. There are examples of that, but it's very hard to operate in a large enterprise, protecting your current business and at the same time funding disruption. I saw that firsthand at Xerox. And as noted from above, because of unforeseen new business models and users, we end up with very different markets, but in most cases, they're ultimately significantly larger than when we started, but the source of the profitability shifts radically. And that previous owners who might have been information gatekeepers are no longer, because information shifts to the edges of networks. And so you have to add more value than just acting as a gatekeeper. You have to connect people or provide ubiquitous access or provide some innovation or something else. And many of the traditional business models provided restricted access, and therefore there were a lot of middlemen who extracted outsized returns. That tends to be disrupted when you go to digital network technologies. And then finally, there are substantial returns to not only scale, but also scope. And we see that that tends to bring rise to ecosystems. And when an ecosystem gets liquidity, it's awfully hard to disrupt it. And it tends to create these massive enterprises. And we see what those are today. We expect similar things to happen in IP, but our whole design is to try to not own the ecosystem. It's rather to facilitate it so that other people can build it. And because we're providing essentially pretty open access, which is contrary to most other businesses, our hope is that we'll be able to do that in kind of a syndicated, federated way rather than as a monolithic power. That's at least our aspiration. So I hope that's useful to you as some perspectives of somebody who spent the better part of 4 decades applying transformational technologies to various businesses.
All right, thank you so much, Michael. And we do have one question coming in. Go ahead, Leslie. I think the microphone. Yeah, he's not on mute, but the sound's not coming through. I'll just give him a second. Otherwise, think I have a handle on his question. I think I understand his question as, so some of the IP that can be on your platform, does that include things like models and modeling, for instance, for risk assessment and mitigation, or other kinds of consulting?
It can. You would obviously describe what it is, and then the supporting documentation would be there. To the extent that, let's say, you have a cloud-based solution, which is a possibility, the platform can link. You can have a list of documents supporting it and say, here's how you would get to it. We're going to have enhancements to provide any form of media, including links to outside services, to be able to be part of that proprietary information. So the answer is we can do some of that today, and we'll do more of that in the future.
Okay.
I mean, if it's an Excel model, you could upload the file, but I don't know that people want to deliver that. That's, modeling tends to be cloud-based, so it depends on the answer to that. But the short answer is we can do some of that today. There's always a workaround, and we'll be able to do a lot of that as we go forward.
Okay. And can you remind us once more, when does the web page, when's that update coming?
Well, it's live today, so you can see
Right.
ideation.com, but towards the end of the month, we are going to launch some additional capabilities, including a new landing page, some website enhancements, and a rather flexible reporting module where you can create your own reporting and sort it on the fly to suit whatever needs you have. And that's what's coming towards the end of June. So we don't have a specific launch date yet, but if anybody's interested, just shoot me an email and we'll send you out a notice when we launch.
Okay. I'll leave it open for any more questions. But if not, thank you again, Michael. This was really great. All those who attended, well, you'll receive a message soon about when our next meetup will be, but we're always happy to have you, and we hope everyone is staying safe. And yeah, thanks a lot for coming. And thank you again, Michael, for the great presentation.
Yeah, and thanks for inviting us. It's always good to share what we're doing and hear feedback about it.
Yeah. All right, you bet. Okay, everyone, we hope you take care.
Thanks.
Yep, thank you.